Hey there, how's it going? My name's Peter, and welcome to the second video in my Intro to Web Development series. So, in this video, we're going to be going over HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and how they can be combined to make what a website displays to you. So, as you can see right now, we have a blank HTML file, a blank CSS file, a blank JavaScript file, and some miscellaneous other files that we don't need to worry about right now. Also the agenda for today. So when you start with an HTML file, it's going to be blank, but what you can do is you can try and add a template in. I'm using VS Code, and the shortcut for an HTML template is just an exclamation mark. If you're using a different code editor, you might have a different command, and I encourage you to look that up. Or if you're using just a notepad and you don't actually have this functionality, you can just copy from here. This just sets up the basic structure of an HTML file. We have the doc type, which tells it that it's HTML. We have the language set to English. And we have the head and body. Inside the head, we have a bunch of metadata that we don't really need to worry about. It's just information that helps the browser know what our document is. And we have the title. And this title is what shows up on this tab right here. So we can see if we actually refresh this page, this is the file that we have right now. We'll see document. And in the body, we can put our content. So every web page is going to be about something. For this example, let's make our web page about turtles, because I like turtles. We'll change the title to turtles, and we'll add some content here. The first thing we want to add is a header. And a header element starts with H, and it can go from H1 to H6. H1 being the biggest header, and H6 being the smallest heading. So let's go with H1. And inside this, we should put our text. I will say, I love turtles. And then after that, we have some more content that we probably want to write. And we'll write it inside a paragraph. So here we can write, I love turtles. Turtles are really great. Here are some turtles. And if we refresh the page now, we can see the title has changed. We have our heading, and we have our content. Also, I misspoke earlier. It's called a heading, not a header. There is a difference, but it doesn't really matter. Next, we should add some turtles to our page. And to do this, we can use a list. Now, there are two types of lists. There are ordered lists, which involve each bullet point being a number, and unordered lists, which are just bullet points. For this one, we can go with an unordered list, which is UL. And here we're going to nest elements. What nesting elements is just putting elements inside of other elements. So here we have a blank list. And how do we tell it that we want a bullet? Well, we use the list item element. And so we can see we've put the list item inside the unordered list. And what do we want the list item to contain? Let's nest another element. We want a paragraph. And we're going to say turtle1. So we have a paragraph nested inside a list item, nested inside an unordered list. So if we refresh our page, we can see we have an unordered list containing a list item with a paragraph inside saying turtle1. Now let's add another element. We'll just do the same thing, and we'll say turtle2. Refresh the page again, and we have turtle2 right here. Something else we can do is we can add an image of the turtle. And luckily, I've already pre-downloaded 2 turtle images. We have this image and this image. And so we can add these to our page. The way to add images is very simple. It's just image. But we also need to give it a source. So what we're going to do is we're going to type source equals and the link of the image. The / just means look in the current folder because the image is in the same folder as our HTML file. And an image actually doesn't have a closing tag. It's actually merged into one. So we can see here we have the opening, and then we have the slash and the greater than sign to close. Some HTML elements are like this, and some HTML elements have the normal opening and closing tag. And here we can see we wrote the source. And so this is called an attribute. Different elements have different attributes that you can write to give it important information. Here, since it's an image element, it takes a source attribute, which tells it the location of the image it's going to display. Now we're just going to do the same thing with the second turtle. And if we save and refresh the page, we should see 2 adorable turtles. That's great. And finally, I want to show you how to add a link. You actually don't do this. I know that it might seem like you do this because it's a link, but what you really want to do is use the A element. And A stands for anchor. And don't get weirded out by the name, it just means it's anchoring your link in place. And A takes an attribute called href, which is the URL that you want to link to. And so we're just going to go to Wikipedia, turtle. And we can copy this link, paste it in here, and then we can give it some text content. Turtle link. Whoops. And so we have the attribute telling it where to link to, and we have the text content inside. And if we refresh the page, we will see a turtle link that if we click on will bring us to the Wikipedia page. Great. Now there's one glaring flaw with our web page that you might have noticed. And that's the fact that this one turtle is so much bigger than the other turtle. And that's just because the images I downloaded were not the same size. But that makes our website look kind of ugly. And if we want to fix this, we can go to our style sheet. So in CSS, our style sheet, we can tell different HTML elements how to display things and customize the way they look. So in this case, we're going to be customizing our images. So we use the selector image, and then we tell it inside curly braces that we want the width to be 400 pixels, and we want the height to be 400 pixels as well. So what this does is it will tell every image that you want this width and you want this height for the image. And if we go back and refresh the page, we should see nothing has changed actually. And why has nothing changed? We forgot to do one crucial step. We have to tell this document to connect with this style sheet. And the way to do that is actually the link element that I showed you earlier but told you not to use. You can go in the head because you're not actually displaying the style sheet, you're just telling the document about it. So this should go in head. And you start a link element and you tell it the relationship is style sheet and the reference, which is the URL, is the location of our style sheet, which is style.css. And if we refresh our page, we should see now the turtles have been resized because our HTML file has successfully connected with our style sheet. Now, what if we didn't want to modify each individual turtle? What if we only wanted to modify this turtle, the second one? Well, we have to have a way to tell these two elements apart. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give each of these an ID. And an ID is basically a unique identifier that you can give to an element so that you can identify it within your code. And the way to do that is simple. You just type ID equals, and then we can come up with an ID for it. We're going to say this one's turtle1 image. And we're going to say this one is turtle2 image. So what do we want to do with this? What if I wanted to make this bigger when I hovered over it? We would go to our CSS. We want to tell it that we're selecting by ID, not by element anymore. So we have this £, and the ID is turtle2 image. So I will copy that over. And we want to just tell it what to do. Let's say I want to make it bigger, 500 pixels. If we refresh our page again, and we will see that the first one didn't change at all, but the second one got bigger. Now, I said earlier that I wanted to do it when I hovered over the page. So what we can use is this thing called a pseudo class in CSS. And what we do to do this is we just put 2 colon signs. And then these are all different pseudo classes, and what they are they represent states that the element can be in. And we can change the style depending on the state that the element is in. And so let's just find hover. All right. I apologize. It's actually a single colon, not a double colon. But the point remains. When we type hover, we tell it that we want to apply this styling on this ID element only when it's hovered over. And so we go to our web page, and when it's hovered over, we have the different size. All right, finally, we can consider adding some user interaction to the page, because who doesn't love user interaction? And when you're accomplishing user interaction, generally you're going to be using JavaScript. Now, for the most part, JavaScript works like any other programming language. One of the biggest differences is that when you're declaring a variable in JavaScript, you use the keyword let, and then you just set the variable. You don't need to actually tell it what type it is. JavaScript will figure it out by itself. Other than that, all the normal features that every tutorial on the internet goes over, and the ones that you know and love, like objects, classes, addition, multiplication, subtraction, division, all that good stuff works in JavaScript as well. And if you're interested, there are a ton of tutorials online. For our purposes, we're mostly just going to be worried about using JavaScript to add interaction to our web page. And so the first thing that we need to do is connect JavaScript to our HTML. And you can see I've put a script element down here. And what the script element does is it links a JavaScript page to our HTML. And so we can see here we have the source attribute once again, and I've linked it to the JavaScript file that I have. One thing you might notice is that the script element actually has a closing tag. And what this means is you could technically write all your JavaScript in here, JavaScript. But don't do this. Because if you start writing JavaScript on your HTML pages, it's bad practice. People get confused. It starts being very confusing to know what's actually coming from where. It's actually just much better to keep separate JavaScript files. So we're not going to be using this. We're just going to be linking it to our actual JavaScript file. And in the JavaScript file, let's say we want to add some functionality back to our page. Let's say when I click on this turtle image, I want to have a message pop up. And when I click on this turtle image, I also want to have a message pop up, but I want them to be different messages. How would we do that? Well, first, we would have to tell JavaScript about these two images. And so let's make variables for them. Let's call image1, turtle image1. And let's set this variable equal to this thing. So how we're going to do this is we're going to use this thing called document. And what document is it's just a representation of our HTML file, and it has a bunch of methods to help us select elements. One of the most general ones is the query selector, which selects the first element that matches whatever we input. So if we input, for example, image, it would select the first turtle. And that's good. But we also want the second turtle because we're going to be adding functionality to both of them. So how we would do this is we could do query selector, but instead of just telling it the element, we might want to tell it an ID. And once again, the ID is represented by the pound sign. And we'll just look at what the ID for this is. It's called turtle2 image. We'll copy it over. And we have the second turtle. So now we've told JavaScript about these two images. It's time to add some functionality. What do we want to happen? Let's say we want, when we click on these, as I said, we want an alert to pop up. So what JavaScript has to help us accomplish this is this concept called events. And events are basically exactly what they sound like. They're when something happens. More specifically, in this case, it's when something happens on our page. And so we want to tell JavaScript to do something whenever the thing that we're trying to check for happens. So to do this, we can come here, say turtle image1, add event listener. And so this will listen for a specific event and run a function when that event occurs. In this case, let's do the click event. So when I click on this image. And the function that I want is, here I'm just giving it a function. You could technically make a function outside of it and pass in the name, but I'm just making the function directly inside. We're going to say alert. Is it alert or alarm? I forgot. It's alert, yeah. Turtle1 was clicked. And then we're going to do the same thing with turtle image2. Except this time we're going to say turtle2 was clicked. And obviously, this is a pretty contrived example. It's just to demonstrate the functionality. You could come up with all sorts of different events. There's a list that you can just look up if you Google JavaScript events, and you can write the function to be whatever you want. I'm just doing a simple function for demonstration purposes. And so if we actually save this and come back to our page and refresh, when we click on the image of turtle1, the page will say turtle1 was clicked. And when we click on turtle2, the page will say turtle2 was clicked. And so that's how we can add some really cool user interaction to our website. Now, I know this page still looks really bad, and it's hard to get a web page looking good. So in general, what people tend to do is they don't tend to go in and write all the HTML by themselves. People can just go to certain websites and download the template. I got a template from Start Bootstrap, but you can look anywhere on the internet. I just came here because this one is free, and it's a template for a blog. And once you download the file, if you actually open it up, let me just open it up right here. You can see they write all the HTML and stuff for you. You can just worry about filling in the content. And if you paste and open the file, you can see it actually looks really cool. It looks like an actual website. And so if you want to learn more about actually designing the website, I recommend just downloading some templates, looking at what they're doing with the HTML, the CSS, and just playing around with it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This is not a design course, really. It's just introducing you to the functionality. And you can play around with all sorts of templates online and figure out what kind of website you want to make. All right, that's everything for today. Thank you for watching.